Hello and welcome to this HESES training video. In this video we will look at the definition of the modes of study used by HESES. These are full-time, sandwich year out and part-time. We'll also say a few words about apprenticeship students. The mode in which students study determines which table they are recorded on in the HESES workbook. As you can see, these are on table 1 where we have full-time students and also sandwich year out students, which also go on table 1. On table 2 we just have part-time. Annex D is the place to refer to in the HESES guidance for full details. Table 1 records full-time student activity, so let's look at the criteria for this mode. First, full-time fees are chargeable. Fees can be waived, but there are restrictions, and these are given in Annex D. Next, students are normally required to attend for at least 24 weeks in the year of engagement. I've highlighted and lent on that word attend because that's what it means here, to actually show up in person. And this could be at the provider's premises or perhaps somewhere else like a subcontractor's location. As such, distance learning for HESES purposes, and I stress that, is not recorded as full-time but as part-time. Finally, students must undertake study, tuition, learning in the workplace, work placement for an average of at least 21 hours per week. This can include time spent on a sandwich work placement if the year doesn't meet the criteria to be a sandwich year out. We'll show how this works shortly, so let's look at the next mode, which happens to be sandwich year out. So sandwich years out are also recorded on table 1. A year of engagement is counted as a sandwich year out if it includes a period of work-based experience and it meets these criteria. First, that a reduced fee is chargeable. Second, that the year of engagement meets the definition given in the student support regulations for sandwich years out, or that it's an Erasmus scheme year abroad spent working. Third, that it meets the time-based criteria in Annex D, and these are that no more than 10 weeks is spent in full-time study, or that the total of all the time spent not in full-time study, for example in work placement, is more than 30 weeks. There are examples in Annex D, but let's look at one now. In this example, in year 1, students have 15 weeks of full-time study and a 16-week placement. This year will be recorded as full-time because full-time fees are chargeable. There's a requirement to attend at designated locations for at least 24 weeks. And there's study, tuition, learning in the workplace, work placement for at least 21 hours per week. Notice that in this example, the study and work placement together take the activity over the 24-week threshold. This goes back to the part of our full-time definition when we said that full-time study can include time spent on a sandwich work placement if the year doesn't meet the criteria to be a sandwich year out, and in this year it doesn't. In year 2, assuming all of the other sandwich year out criteria that we just talked about are met, we need to look again at the periods of study and work placement. So we have 15 weeks of full-time study and a second 16-week placement. This would count as a sandwich year out because the total time so far not in full-time study is greater than 30 weeks. So that's the two 16-week placements that we've had so far, making 32 weeks. Finally, we come to part-time. If a year doesn't meet the definitions for full-time or sandwich year out, then for HESES purposes it is considered part-time. It's worth mentioning here that mode can change between years, and this is often because of part-time study. More detail and examples can be found in Annex D. Occasionally, there are scenarios where the HESES definition of mode of study is an issue when comparing with the corresponding individualized data return. This might happen where a student can be studying at a full-time rate but not meet the HESES definition of full-time. So for example, a student could be on a 15-month full-time course where in their second year of engagement, that is the last 3 months of their period of study, they would still be studying at a full-time intensity. in other words for more than 21 hours a week, but would be attending for less than the 24-week threshold needed as part of the HESES full-time criteria. This would make them part-time for our HESES definition, but full-time in terms of the relevant individualized data return. To get around that, we suggest that in the relevant individualized return, so for example for the ILR, use mode stud equals 3. For those completing the student record, use SCS mode equals 02, other full-time. This will allow these students to be recorded correctly. Refer to the additional guidance on mode of study section in Annex D of the HESES guidance. As discussed earlier, some higher education students may be apprentices, and it's important to remember that only activity that directly contributes to their recognised higher education qualification should be counted towards a student's study. In other words, generally, we would normally expect them to be part-time, although occasionally there are exceptions. There are further criteria to be satisfied for this. See the guidance in Annex D. We have a number of resources for providers, and we'll look at the main ones here, but we will also highlight additional resources as we go through this series of recordings. For a high-level view of OFS funding, see our Finance and Funding page, www.officeforstudents.org.uk/for-providers/finance and funding, with the last two parts of that URL having the words hyphenated. For an overview of recurrent funding specifically, add the hyphenated words recurrent funding to the last URL, or perhaps an easier way is to use the search function on our main web page and enter recurrent funding. For more detail about funding, see our annual guide to funding, and you can search for that term on our website to find the latest edition. The best place to start for HESES resources is the main HESES page on the OFS website, which can be found at www.officeforstudents.org.uk/HESES, and of course that is HESES. To stay informed about OFS announcements, including those relating to funding, you can sign up for our email alert service. Visit www.officeforstudents.org.uk/sign up for email alerts, and as usual, the last part of that URL is hyphenated. Thank you for listening and watching.